Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James on Upadesa Saram. I would now request Narayananji to initiate the proceedings with puja. Narayananji.
Om Achyutaya Namaha, Om Anandaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha. Shuklambarvaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyaye Sarva Vighnopashantaye. Ayamurta Samusardo Vivando Mandono Kanando Ayamurta Samusardostu Tadeva Laganam Sadinam Tadeva Paravalam Chandranam Tadeva Vidyavalam Devavalam Tadeva Lakshmi Padete Tengriam Smarami Om Bhu Om Bhuva Om Suva Om Maha Om Jana Om Tava Om Satyam Om Tatsodarvavanyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prajojayat Om Ava Jyotir Samsam Purmusaram Bhagavapata Samasta Durda Shatpara Ki Parmeswati Chittam Karishyam Marisya Karmanaha Nirvenan Prasyatattam Madhav Vignesha Pujam Karshye Prithviya Merit Tulsi Sudsulam Sandagorma Devda Prithvi Diya Tuda Logazitam Vishnunath Tuda Tvam Satariman Devi Gultram Gurusasam Agamartam Tu Devanam Kamnatam Tu Rakshasam Kandaram Karam Yadav Devadman Alanjanam Namopata Samasta Durga Chaitwarasi Parmeswati Tirtam Nirvendasi Tirtam Madhav Vignesha Pujam Karshye Ganaranta Ganapati Kumavame Kaving Kavinam Sutram Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspade Anasunupu Sirsadanam Asmindarcha Bande Mahaganapatim Dhyayami Mahaganapatim Avamayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Asanam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Argyam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Padyam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Samaniyam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Ovasarikasthanam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Sahanandram Samaniyam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Vastradatam Akshadam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Yagnovavidartam Akshadam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Gandham Dharayami Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Gandhovri Akshadam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Aranatam Akshadam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Aritra Kungumam Samarpayami. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Pushpai Pujayami. Om Sumudaya Namaha. Om Ekadandaya Namaha. Om Kapilaya Namaha. Om Gajagarnagaya Namaha. Om Lambodharaya Namaha. Om Vigadaya Namaha. Om Vighnarajaya Namaha. Om Vinayakaya Namaha. Om Dhumagedave Namaha. Om Ganatakshaya Namaha. Om Balachandraya Namaha. Om Gajarnaya Namaha. Om Vakratundaya Namaha. Om Surpagarnaya Namaha. Om Erambaya Namaha. Om Skandabhujvaya Namaha. Om Siddhavinayagare Namaha. Om Shankaramoksha Vinayagare Namaha. Om Atupura Vinayagare Namaha. Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha. Nana Vida Paramada Patra Pushpani Samarpayami. Dhupartam Samarpayami. Dhupartam Samarpayami. Akshadam Samarpayami. भूर्भुवस्सुः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं सत्यं दर्शनं प्रसन्नामि अमृतं स्वाहा ओम प्राणे स्वाहा वाणे स्वाहा ज्ञाने स्वाहा उदाने समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः कुडगण्डशक्करनैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपसंसुत्रावसं समर्पयामि कर्पूरं समर्पयामि गणपतिं नमामि कविं चक्रं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पदे आनन्दं कीर्तिसागरं महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः कर्पूरं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनं ब्रह्मास्मन्यं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ सर्वगुणं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा गणपति प्रसादं सरसा कृणामि ओम 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 शिव ओम ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सर्ववर्ण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओम अभिज्योतिषामृतं ब्रह्मस्वरम् अमोपात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वाराशि परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम शुभे शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीयपरार्थे श्रीवेदे पराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे भागे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरु दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाक्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने यावावृत्तिः रघुवादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शुभकृतुनाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने वर्ष ऋतु कन्नी मासे शुक्लपक्षे पौर्णमी तिथियां शुभतिथौ भानुवासरयुक्तायां उत्तरप्रोष्ठापदा नक्षत्रयुक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभयोग शुभकर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायाम् अस्यां पौर्णमी तिथियां शुभतिथौ मम जन्मापाप जन्मप्रभृति एषणपर्यन्तं मध्ये संभावदानं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य अभिमानार्थम् अस्माहं सह कुर्माणं क्षेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्यनाम अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्तमङ्गलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोषाभ्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञान वैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तदंगम कर्ष पूजां स करिष्ये विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय स कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाचरित मूले सत्रसिद्धो ब्रह्मा मातृगुणे समृद्धा कुशवतु सागरा सर्वे सप्ततिवा सुंदरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदपदरमण गंगे सैवन गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु अंगैः सहिता सर्वे कलशांग समाचरिता आयान्त देवपूजार्थं दुर्दशकारला तंबूरा सागरोत्पन्न विष्णु विष्णु करे देव से पूजित पर्यमादन नमोस्तुते देवो दैवालय प्रोक्त देव देव स्नान अंजान निर्माल्यम सोयाम भवने पूजयेत् ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्तियुक्ताय योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिकूर्माय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दश दिग्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राणप्रतिष्ठा मंत्रस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरिक्ति सामधर्वाणि सन्तांसि सकल जगत्सु सिद्धि सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठा विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरीन्द्रजनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभ्याभ्यां नमः क्रोम कर्दलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वषट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्वधि दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तान बोधिस्त बोधोलिस तरुण सुरकराब्चे पासं गोदंडम इक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचबाणात् विप्राण सुकबालं त्रिनेन सिद्धापि नवसौरोड्या देवी बाला लोर्ना बहुसुदरी प्राणशक्ति परान् ओम वाम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं वाम अम यम रम लम वंशम सम हंस सोहम सोहम हंस अस्यामूर्तो जीवदृष्टिलो अस्यामूर्तो सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाम मनस्वस्तोत्र जीव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद पायुपुस्तानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुखम चिरम दृष्टंदु स्वाहा। ओम अस्य सीतादृष्टमन्दस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरः ऋषिरिकिति सामधर्माणि संतांसि सकल जगस्थितिः सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम कीलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंदर्जनिभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम नाभिकाभ्यां नमः हरिंगष्टिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम शिखाय वसन् आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय भविष्य क्रोमस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध असुनीदे पुनरस्माक्ष सक्ष पुनः प्राणमे नो दैवोगम योग पश्यमे सूर्यमुच्चन्दमरुदयमलयान स्वस्ति आवायो सुप्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन बिम्बेऽस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु। नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः श्री कुबेराय नमः श्री कुशेलाय नमः श्री कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः कुबेराय नमः चतुर्नोति वन्दन्यन पौलसी परसर्पः लक्ष्मीप्रदसी मानगद प्रियईश्वरा। Now I'll recite Bhagavan Saramno Stotram. He Gurubhyo Namah, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Jai Gurave Namah. Abhara Sakti Sugvari, Yashorya Shorya Matram Bhuvanam Samastam, Gunayidam Tam Ramnam Gabiram, Chindavininam Virdi Shindayami, Om Mahasena Om Sena Jataya Namah. ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अगंड संविदागराय नमः ओम औजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत इदावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनादास्तलोतिदाय नमः ओम पराशरकुलोतंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरातर्वत्पलाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयायाम्बासयायवते नमः ओम शोणासुलमहोलीन मानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशान्त महास्थले लप्त विद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्तिनिवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः ओम परमार्थविदे नमः ओम दिव्यराय नमः ओम पितृप्रदान्वेषिणे नमः ओम इंदुना पितृमदे नमः ओम पितृदेस्त सोनशैलम प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तपोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम महोत्साहाय नमः ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः ओम शांतसंकल्प संप्रभाय नमः ओम सुसुंदृसे नमः ओम सवित्रे नमः ओम स्थिराय नमः ओम तपशबीर सर्वंगाय नमः ओम पुल्लांबूद विलोचनाय नमः ओम चंद्रिकासिदास श्री मंडिदानिन मंडलाय नमः ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः ओम सूर्यदाखिल विप्रमाय नमः ओम वेद वेदांत तत्त्वज्ञाय नमः ओम चिन्मये नमः ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः ओम विरूपाक्ष गोवावासाय नमः ओम विराजत सलाहृदये नमः ओम उत्तिक्तनयनाय नमः ओम पूर्णाय नमः ओम रसिदासलतांडवाय नमः ओम गंभीराय नमः ओम परमाचार्याय नमः ओम सुब्रसन्याय नमः ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः ओम दक्षिणासीनिवाय नमः ओम धीराय नमः ॐ दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ॐ स्वराजे नमः। ॐ महर्षिये नमः। ॐ भगवते नमः। ॐ ईट्याय नमः। ॐ भूमविद्याविशारदाय नमः। ॐ विमलाय नमः। ॐ दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ॐ आप्ताय नमः। ॐ ऋजमार्गप्रदर्शकाय नमः। ॐ समत्रुसे नमः। ॐ सत्यत्रुसे नमः। ॐ सत्याय नमः। ॐ प्रसादाय नमः। ॐ अमितविक्रमाय नमः। ॐ सुकुमाराय नमः। ॐ सदानन्दाय नमः। ॐ मृदुवासिने नमः। ॐ दयार्णवाय नमः। ॐ श्री सोणासुर युरुद्भूतस्कन्दाश्रम निकेतनाय नमः। ॐ सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टरे नमः। ॐ सद्भक्तवृन्दपरिवृताय नमः। ॐ गणेशमुनिप्लिङ्गेन सेवितां त्रिसरोरुवाय नमः। ॐ गीतोपदेशसारादिग्रन्थसंसिन्नसंशयाय नमः। ॐ वर्णाश्रममदातीताय नमः। ॐ रसज्ञाय नमः। ॐ सौम्याय नमः। ॐ आत्मवदे नमः। ॐ सर्वावनिमदस्थानां महाराध्याय नमः। ॐ सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ॐ आत्मारामाय नमः। ॐ महाभागाय नमः। ॐ मातृमुक्तिविदायकाय नमः। ॐ विनदाय नमः। ॐ विनुदाय नमः। ॐ विप्राय नमः। ॐ मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ॐ भावगोज्वलाय नमः। ॐ दर्शनादकसम्मारिणे नमः। ॐ मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः। ॐ मिर्चान्दिकर्षादित्याय नमः। ॐ स्मरणाद्मन्दमोचकाय नमः। ॐ अन्धस्मिरषण्डांसवे नमः। ॐ संसारान्वत्तारकाय नमः। ॐ सोनादिश्चरे नमः। ॐ आर्तविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः। ॐ अविच्युतरिजप्रज्ञाय नमः। ॐ नैसर्गिकमहातपसे नमः। ॐ कमण्डलुधराय नमः। ॐ शुभ्रगौरीनवसनाय नमः। ॐ गुहाय नमः। ॐ दण्डवाणीये नमः। ॐ कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ॐ पौरोगपिशक्वराय नमः। ॐ स्कन्दाय नमः। ॐ देवतमाय नमः। ॐ अमर्त्याय नमः। ॐ सेनान्ये नमः। ॐ पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री कार्तिकाय नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री मुरुगाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री वल्ली दैवानीय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री स्वामिनाथने नमः। नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। नमो भगवते श्री नटराजने नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री भैरवने नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री नन्दिमहेश्वराय नमः। ॐ नमो भगवते श्री शिवपार्वतीये नमः। ॐ नमः शिवाय नमः। ॐ नमः शिवाय नमः। ॐ नमः शिवाय नमः। ॐ शिवाय नमः। ॐ शिवाय नमः। ॐ शिवाय नमः। We will recite Upadesa Saram now. कर्तुराज्ञया प्रापदे फलं कर्म किंबरं कर्म दज्जडं कृहति महददौ पदनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गदनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेचया कृतं सिद्धशोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मना कार्यमुद्दमं भूजनं जप चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतैषधी युग्धसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवा तुज्यमन्दद सिद्धजं जप ध्यानमुत्तमम् आद्यधारया श्रोदसासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलदबरं वेदभावना सौवमित्यसो भावनाविदा भावलीमदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धम तिरुस्तरे मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगबो दाच निश्चितम् आयुरोदना दीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोदसाधनं सिद्धवायव सिद्धिक्रियायुधा सागयोर्वयि शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदं गुण भवति नो मृदं प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसं एकचिन्तना नासमेत्यद नष्टमानसो गृष्टयोगिन कृत्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं चित्तमात्मन शित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं दुहिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अमयं कुतो भवति चिनवद ऐपदद्यहं निजविसारणम् अहमिनाशवात् यमहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिक्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अप्यल्यसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नामसेकस दज्जडं सस सत्ववासिगा जित्ववेदरा सद्दयायिकी सिद्धयायहम् ईसजीवयोर् वेशजीविदा सत्स्वभावदो वस्तु केवलं वेश आनद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईसदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपद आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्द्वया आत्मनिष्ठदा ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनची ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्तरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा आपूर्णसि सुगं बन्धमुक्त्यदि तम्बरं सुगं विन्ददीयजी वस्तुदैविग अहमवेदगं निजविभानगं महतितं तवो रमणवाद्यं महतितं तवो रमणवाद्यं महतितं तवो रमणवाद्यम् अरुणाचल शिवाय रमणाय नमः रमणाय नमः रमणाय नमः।
Namo Ramana. Once again, a very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. As always, we shall be continuing our conversation on Upadesa Saram, which Mr. James has been guiding us since early this year. Before we commence, sir, there is a question on YouTube which I have shared with you from Mr. Vinay Nayak. You may like to take it up during the course of your session. Namo Ramana.
Okay.
Should I read out the question, sir?
Yeah, I can see it here. Yes. Okay.
For the benefit of the devotees who may not have read the question, which I pasted on the chat on the chat screen, the question from Mr. Vinay Nayak is, quote, how to be more deeply involved in manana? Shravana seems easy, but not manana. What are the hints to sink down in reflection? Unquote.
Okay. Shall I start with answering this question, and then we can proceed with Upadesa Saram?
Sure, sir.
Manana is actually easy. That is relatively straightforward. It's deep manana. Is possibly we don't do manana deeply enough, but manana is actually very natural. When we read anything, unless we read it extremely superficially, we try to understand what we're reading. The effort to understand, to assimilate what is meant there is manana. But the normal manana, the manana we do naturally is often quite superficial. But what Bhagavan is teaching us is extremely deep. And though what Bhagavan teaches us is very simple, it is at the same time very deep and very subtle. So we need to think about it very carefully. So all manana is thinking about it and trying to understand it correctly, checking within our own mind whether our understanding is correct. For example, Bhagavan says one thing in one place, he says another thing in another place. Do we understand what is the connection between these things? Do we understand how all these fit together? Because all of Bhagavan's teachings are a coherent whole. So everything fits in with everything else if we understand it correctly. So thinking about what Bhagavan says here, what he says there, and the key to understanding Bhagavan properly is to understand that whatever he teaches us, he's teaching it for one purpose and one purpose alone. That is, Bhagavan's aim is the annihilation of ego. And ego can be annihilated. Ego is a false awareness of ourself. So in order to annihilate ego, we must be aware of ourselves as we actually are. In other words, false awareness can be destroyed only by correct awareness. But false awareness is the awareness, I am this person, I am this body, I am Michael, or I am whoever. We all have that is whatever name is given to the person we seem to be, we identify with the name and form of this person, this body. That is a false awareness of ourselves. That is what is called avidya. And avidya can be removed only by vidya. Vidya doesn't mean just what we learn from books. Vidya means the correct awareness of ourselves as we actually are. So all Bhagavan's teaching, and in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to attend to ourselves. We need to investigate ourselves. So all Bhagavan's teachings, the central aim of all of Bhagavan's teachings is to direct our attention back to ourselves. So if we understand this, then we can begin to understand Bhagavan's teachings in context. What actually is he pointing at? And how each particular teaching is connected with this one central point of turning our attention back to ourselves. That is the aim of all of Bhagavan's teachings. So thinking about these things carefully and trying to understand, that is what manana is. In order for our manana to become deeper, we need to actually put it into practice. That is, Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, they are three parts of one process. And it's not a process, it's not a linear process. It's not first we do Sravana, then we do manana, then we do nididhyasana, and that's the end of it. No. But it's an iterative process. That means it repeats itself as we go round and round and round, so to speak. That is, when we read Bhagavan's teachings first, we understand something. We try and think about it, and we'll understand a little bit. But then we have to try to put it into practice. When we put it into practice, we will gain more clarity from within. And then when we read again, we'll understand more deeply what Bhagavan is saying. The more we are able to see what he's saying, the more deeply we'll be able to think about it, the manana. And so the deeper we'll be able to go in our practice. So sravana, manana, nididhyasana, these should be going on throughout our life. That is, what is most important of all is the practice, the nididhyasana. That means turning our attention back towards ourselves. But in order to understand what is meant by self-investigation, what is meant by self-attentiveness, we have to understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly. The deeper and more subtle our understanding is of the teachings is, the deeper and more subtle our understanding of the practice will be. So but the reflection that goes on in the manana, the manana part of the process, that is thinking deeply about it. It may seem to be just a conceptual understanding, but actually manana is about more than a conceptual understanding. We need to actually see the truth in what Bhagavan says. We need to recognize when, for example, Bhagavan says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That's what he says in Ulladu verse 26. But is this just mere words, or do we actually understand what he means? What actually is Bhagavan saying there? If we think about it, this is actually our experience. Only we rise and stand as ego during waking and dream. In sleep, ego ceases to exist, albeit only on a temporary basis. But so long as we rise and stand as ego, we're aware of so many other things. We're aware of the world, the mind and our thoughts and emotions and so on and so forth. Everything, all phenomena appear only when we rise as ego. When we don't rise as ego is in sleep, we're not aware of anything other than our own being. So we can begin to recognize the truth of what Bhagavan says. We need to actually see it in our own experience. But it's actually even more than that. It's just as we go deeper and deeper in the practice, we will just recognize more and more clearly what Bhagavan is saying. So the manana, though initially it's just trying to understand the concepts, trying to understand what Bhagavan has taught us conceptually, but it's also about seeing more deeply what actually he means. So truly speaking, though we talk of sravana, manana, nididhyasana, the boundaries between these are not so clear. That is, if we are doing the sravana, if we're reading properly, we'll be thinking about it while reading it. So there's an overlap between the sravana and manana. And if we're doing the manana correctly, it will automatically be drawing our attention back to ourselves. So there's an overlap there. Even between the sravana and the nididhyasana, there's an overlap. Because if we're really paying attention to what Bhagavan is saying, that will turn our attention back to ourselves. So this process of sravana, manana, nididhyasana, it's actually a very natural process. Even when we're learning some worldly thing, if we're studying at college or something, studying some subject, we don't just read the books. We read them and we think about them, we try to understand what is said there. And if it's a more practical subject, we try to put it into practice. And when we try to put it into practice, then we come across difficulties and we go back to read some more and then we understand some more. So this is a natural process of learning. So the question is how to be more deeply involved in manana. Sravana seems easy, but not manana. Whatever hints to sink deep in reflection, that is, the manana will come naturally to us to the extent that we're really interested. When we read Bhagavan's teachings, if we're really interested in what he's saying, if we really want to understand what Bhagavan is pointing at, the manana will come naturally to us. And if we are doing the Sravana without manana, we are not really doing the Sravana properly, because merely reading things, we can't understand merely by reading it. We have to think about it, try to understand what is meant there. What is Bhagavan actually, what's he mean? What do these words pointing at? But ultimately, the subject Bhagavan is talking about is an extremely subtle subject. The words cannot adequately express what Bhagavan is talking about. So Bhagavan's words are pointers. We need to understand what is being pointed at. So, and the most effective way to deepen our manana is to put it into practice, because when we're putting it into practice, that's when we're doing the nididhyasana means deep contemplation. That implies deep contemplation on ourselves, on our own being. When we're meditating on ourselves, when we're contemplating ourselves, we are attending to the original source of light, the original light, the light of pure awareness that is always shining in our heart as I am. So the true clarity comes from within. So the deeper we go in the practice, the more our mind is being purified and clarified. And then thereby we'll be able to see more clearly what it is Bhagavan means. And so the Sravana and the manana will become deep to the extent to which we go deep in the practice. And to the extent that our Sravana and manana become deep, that will push us still deeper in the practice. So this is actually, the three are, they go hand in hand, and it's a natural process. When we read something, we try to understand it. When we understand it, we try to put it into practice. We try to not just understand it conceptually, but see it from our own experience. Trying to see it from our own experience is a nididhyasana. Bhagavan is talking so much about this I. What is this I? What is that is I in its pure condition is our own being. I, when it's mixed and conflated with adjuncts, it's ego. So Bhagavan has taught us so much about the nature of I and the nature of this adjunct mixed I called ego. So we need to understand these things from our own experience by looking deep within. So it's very difficult to give a single answer to a question like this. The main thing is, if you are really interested in what you're reading, you will naturally be doing manana, because you'll naturally be trying to understand it. And the deeper you go in the practice, the deeper your manana will also become. So I hope this is, it's probably not an adequate answer, but I hope it's at least pointing you in the right direction. Vinay, I hope this is an answer that you find useful, and that you're able to apply in your own life. So now I will begin to talk about Upadesa Saram, which is the main subject for today. Oh, and by the way, Vinay, if you want to ask any further questions, you can ask the questions and I can come to them after I've finished talking about the verses. So last time I spoke about verses, I think, if I remember correctly, 24, 25, and 26. So this time I'm going to be taking up 27 onwards. But before I proceed any further with 27, I just want to put all this sequence of verses in context. We need to understand what is what Bhagavan is, what is the central point Bhagavan is talking about in these verses. That is, in verse 19, he talks about the, wait a second, I'll just go back there and get the verse. in verse 19, Bhagavan is describing the practice of self-investigation and what happens when we investigate ourselves. That is, the basic meaning is, by investigating from where this I rises, I falls down. This is self-investigation. That is, aham ayam kuta bhavati chimvata ai patiyaham nijavicharanam. That means by investigating from where this I rises, this I means ego, I falls down. This is self-investigation. So there he's talking about the practice of self-investigation. Then in the next verse, verse 20, he talks about what happens when this I falls down. I falling down means I is annihilated. So in the next verse, he says, ahami nasa bhaji, on I be undergoing annihilation. In other words, when ego is annihilated, aham taya spiriti hrit swayam, the heart shines forth spontaneously as I am I. Paramapurna sat. This is the supreme whole reality. So when ego dies, what remains and becomes clear when ego dies is the underlying reality, our true identity, the heart, which shines as I am I. That is, ego is the false awareness, I am this body, I am this or I am that, is ego. But the pure awareness, I am, is not aware of itself as anything other than itself. So Bhagavan expresses it as aham aham, I am I. That means. And this is Paramapurna Sat. Paramapurna Sat means Parama means it's supreme. Purna means it's whole, in the sense it's infinite. It's the entirety of everything, Sat, existence. So this is the totality of all existence. This is what actually exists. That which, the heart, that which shines forth as I am I when ego dies, that is Paramapurna Sat. So here he's talking about, this is the revelation of our real nature. So from verse 21 onwards, he's talking about what our real nature is. He's elaborating upon what he says here about our real nature. So our real nature is what shines forth as I am I. In the next verse, he says, this is what the word I always refers to. I'll read the Tamil, because Tamil is a bit, the wording in Tamil is a bit clearer to me. Nanenum sopporul amadu nalume, nanatra tukatam undipara, namadin me niktal undipara. That literally means that is referring to what he spoke about in the previous verse, the heart, which shines forth as I am I, which is the Paramapurna Sat. That is at all times the import or substance of the word called I. That is what the word I actually refers to, is only that fundamental, the heart, the fundamental awareness that shines forth as I am I when ego dies. That is what the word I always refers to. Why? Because of the literal meaning is because of the exclusion of our non-existence, even in sleep, which is devoid of I. That means when he says sleep is devoid of I, he means not that we don't exist there, but that ego doesn't exist there. But though ego doesn't exist in sleep, we don't cease to exist. So that is what he refers to as the exclusion of our non-existence. Namadime nikatal, because the exclusion of our non-existence, even in sleep, which is devoid of I. That means when we use the word I, usually we are referring to the person we seem to be. Why do we take this person to be I? Because of ego. Ego is that false awareness, I am this person. But this person is not what we actually are, nor is the ego which is aware of itself as I am this person. Even that is not what we actually are, because that is absent in sleep, but we don't cease to exist in sleep. So we are that which is beyond ego. So Bhagavan is what we actually are, what shines alone in sleep is that Paramapurna Sat, the heart, the fundamental awareness, but knows itself as just as I am I. And then, having said what we are not, what we are in that verse 21, in verse 22, he then concludes what we are not. Basically, in verse 22, he refers to the 5 sheaves. Since the body, mind, intellect, life, and darkness, that's the 5 sheaves, are all Jada and Asat, they are not I, which is Sat. So all this body, mind, intellect, life, and darkness, that's the 5 sheaves, they're all Jada, that they have no awareness of their own, and they are also Asat, they have no existence of their own. They seem to exist only in the view of ego, but they don't actually exist. What actually exists is only I, the pure I. So that's why Bhagavan said, they're not I, which is Sat. In Tamil, he says, Satana Nanala. They are not I, which is Sat. In the Sanskrit version, he says, Vigra Hendriya Pranadi Tama, that's the 5 sheaves, Na Aham, are not I. Eka Sat Tat Jadam, He Asat. That means are not I, the one existence, because that is non-aware and non-existent. It is Jada and it's Asat. Whereas I is Ekasat, the one existent, the one thing that actually exists is only I. So Bhagavan has said what we actually are and what we are not. But then he goes deeper into the subject in verse 23. In verse 23, what he says is, because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to be aware of what exists is awareness. That is, if we say, but what exists, the term he uses in Tamil is ulladu. In Sanskrit, he uses the term sattva. Sattva means what actually exists. If the awareness that knows what exists were something other than what exists, it would be a non-existent awareness. So that awareness cannot be other than what exists. And what exists cannot be other than the awareness, because if what exists was something other than awareness, it would then be an object of awareness, in which case it would depend on awareness for its seeming existence. So because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to be aware of what exists is awareness. Uludu unavahum, he says in Tamil. In Sanskrit, he says, Satya hichit, but existence itself is awareness. What shines as existence is awareness, is the implication. And then he concludes that verse in Tamil, he says, Unave namai ulam, awareness alone exists as we. And in Sanskrit, he says, Chittaya hi aham. That is, as awareness is certainly I. That means what exists as awareness is certainly I. So again, Bhagavan is pointing out what we actually are. We are what actually exists, and we are also the awareness of what actually exists. In other words, we are Sat-Chit. We are not this body, or any of these 5 sheaves, as he said in the previous verse, because they're Jada and Asat. What we are is only the Sat and Chit. We are that which actually exists and that which is aware. So he points out that our real nature is Sat-Chit, just pure being, pure awareness. And that pure being and pure awareness are one and the same thing. Then in verse 24, he says, in their existing nature, God and soul are only one substance. That is, what we actually are is Sat-Chit. And that is what God actually is. That is what he means in Tamil. He says, Irukam Yekaya. That means in our existing nature, or in our nature as existence, how he says it in Sanskrit is Sat Svabhavata, by existence nature, Vastu Kevalam, the substance is one. That means the substance of God and soul are one. But so why do we seem to be something separate from God? Only because of we are aware of ourselves having adjuncts, that the adjunct that we mistake to be ourselves, or our awareness of the adjunct that we mistake to be ourselves, namely the five sheaths, the body, mind, etc. This is what Bhagavan refers to as adjunct awareness. Why does he refer to it in Tamil as adjunct awareness, upadi unavu, rather than just upadi? Because the adjuncts are nothing but a false awareness. That is this body, life, mind, intellect, and will, the five sheaths, do not exist independent of our awareness of them. So it's the awareness we have of them but is what makes it, and because we take them to be ourselves, that is what makes it. So it's, in other words, it's our awareness, I am this body, but makes us seem to be different from God. Though actually in substance, the vastu or the podal, what we actually are is not other than God. And then in verse 25, so since we and God are one in substance, what makes us seem different is only the upadis. So how can we know God as he actually is? This is what Bhagavan answers in verse 25. Knowing oneself, leaving aside adjuncts, is itself knowing God, because of shining as oneself. That means because God is what shines as ourself, as what we actually are, knowing ourself without adjuncts is knowing God. Because we and God are one substance. It's only the adjuncts that seem to separate us. So if we see ourselves without adjuncts, in other words, if we see ourselves as just I am, right? Now we are seeing ourselves as I am this person, I am this body. That is a false awareness of ourselves, because that's an adjunct mixed awareness. But if we see ourselves without adjuncts, that means seeing ourselves as just I am. That is seeing God, because God is what shines as ourself. That is what's always shining in our heart as I am. That is God. So all these verses, Bhagavan is indicating what we actually are. And in this verse 25, he talks about knowing ourselves without adjuncts. Or in Sanskrit, he says, seeing ourselves, swapnadarshanam. In Sanskrit, what he says is veshahanata, giving up the costume. In other words, giving up the upadis, the adjuncts. Seeing one's own self is seeing God. Swapnadarshanam means seeing oneself, or seeing one's own self. That is seeing God. Swapma rupataha, because God is our own. Swapma rupataha means God is in the form of our own self, or because he is the form of our own self. In other words, he's Atmaswarupa, he's our own real nature. And then in this verse, in Tamil, he talks about knowing ourselves. In Sanskrit, he talks about seeing ourselves. But what does he mean by knowing ourselves or seeing ourselves? That is what he clarifies in verse 26. Because we are not an object, we can never know ourselves as an object. Since we are not an object, we cannot, when we know an object, knowing an object is an act of knowing, but knowing ourselves, we can't know ourselves like we know other things. We can't know ourselves by an act of knowing. We know ourselves just by being ourselves, because what we actually are is just awareness, and awareness doesn't need to do anything to know itself. That is the idea in verse 26. So what he says in verse 26, in Tamil, he says, Tanai iritale tannai aridalam. That means being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Tani rendatratal. Because oneself is devoid of two. In other words, we are not two different things, one self to know another self. This is Tanmaya Nishta. And in the Sanskrit version, he says, Atma samstitihi, being oneself, swapma darshanam. That is, being oneself is seeing oneself, one's own self. Atma nidvaya, because oneself is not being two. It's devoid of two-ness. There's not we cannot know ourselves as an object, because we can't. If we to know ourselves as an object, we'd have to split ourselves in two. One half of ourselves a subject to know the other half of ourselves an object. But obviously, we cannot be split. We cannot divide ourselves as subject and object. So we can know ourselves only by being ourselves. That's the idea in this verse. So this is where we came up to last time. So since he's talking here about, but the main message here is that knowing ourselves is nothing but being ourselves. So in the next verse, he talks more about the nature of real knowledge. Real knowledge means the knowledge of ourselves as we actually are. And what he says in this verse, in the Tamil version, he says, Arivu ariyamayum atra arive arivahum. That means only the awareness that is devoid of awareness and ignorance is awareness. He puts it very, very succinctly. So what does this mean? What the arivu ariyamayum, that means awareness and ignorance, or knowledge and ignorance, that is referring to knowledge or awareness of other things and ignorance of other things. So that pure awareness that is completely devoid of knowledge or ignorance about anything other than itself, that alone is real knowledge, is the implication. And then he says, unmeidu, this is true, or this is the truth, or this is the reality, or this is what is real. Why? Arivataku ondru illai. There is not anything for knowing. That is, when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know ourselves as pure awareness. In the clear view of pure awareness, there is nothing other than itself. Why? Because pure awareness alone is what actually exists. Everything else, all phenomena, appear only in the view of ego, the false awareness, I am this body. So when we remove ego and know ourselves as we actually are, by being ourselves as we actually are, that is a state devoid of any knowledge or ignorance of anything else. So that is the pure awareness, the awareness that is. Why is there no knowledge of anything else? Because in that state of pure awareness, there's not anything for knowing. But everything else appears only in the view of ego, which is the adjunct mixed awareness, I am this body. When ego is eradicated and the pure awareness, I am alone remains, then there's nothing other than that for it to know. That is the idea. In the Sanskrit version, what he says is, jnana bhajita ajnana hina chit jnanam. That means awareness, chit, which is devoid of knowledge, jnana bhajita, and bereft of ignorance, ajnana hina, is knowledge. Here knowledge is used in the sense of awareness. So if we translate both jnana and chit, if we translate both as awareness, because that's what they both imply, it's the meaning is awareness devoid of awareness and bereft of ignorance is awareness. It's the real awareness. So in other words, the pure awareness alone is the real awareness. The awareness that knows anything other than itself, or is ignorant of anything other than itself, that is not the real awareness. That is ego. It's ego that knows other things. And because we know other things, we know that there are so many things we don't know. The more we know we don't know. So knowledge and ignorance both exist only for ego. In sleep, when ego subsides, all knowledge and ignorance comes to an end. And then what remains shiny is the pure awareness I am. And then he concludes the verse in Sanskrit by saying, Asti kim yatum antaram. That means, is there another to know? In other words, is there anything other than ourselves to know? In the state of pure awareness, there is nothing other than ourselves to know. This is a very, very important verse. And this verse is so important, that the central idea of this verse is so important, but he repeats the same idea in verse 12 of Ulladu Napadu. the first sentence of verse 12 of Upadesa is almost identical to the first sentence in this verse 27 in Upadesa Saram. That's what he says is, Arivu ariyamayum atradu arivu ame. That means what is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually knowledge. Or what is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually awareness. That is the real awareness, the actual awareness is only that awareness which is devoid of knowledge and ignorance. And then he goes on to say, Ariyum adu unme arivu ahadu. That which knows is not real knowledge. What he means by that which knows anything other than itself is not real knowledge. That is, the real knowledge is pure awareness. Pure awareness never knows anything other than itself. It does know itself, but not in the sense that of knowing other things. It knows itself just by being itself, because it is pure awareness. And then he says, Aridaku arivittaku anyum indrai olibadal tan aribahum. That means since one shines without another for knowing or for causing to know, oneself is knowledge. Oneself, in other words, oneself is the pure awareness. Parandru, one is not a void. Well, what we actually are is not a void. Ari, know this. So this is such an important idea, but he's repeated it both in Upadesa and in Upadesa. Upadesa he composed about, I think, about April 1927, and just over a year later, in July, August 1928, he composed Upadesa. But this is such an important idea. He repeated it again. He repeated it when he composed Upadesa. He elaborated upon it a little. So why is this so important? Because knowledge and ignorance of anything other than ourselves, firstly, it's a dyad, it's a pair of opposites. And secondly, the knowledge and ignorance of other things appears only in the view of ego. It's only ego that knows things other than itself. And because it knows some things other than itself, it knows there are so many things that it doesn't know. Or it seems to it that there are so many things it doesn't know. But in the state of pure awareness, ego is absent. So all knowledge and ignorance of other things is also absent. And so there's nothing other than ourselves to know. That's why he ends by saying, Asti kim yatum antaram. Is there anything, is there any other to know? Why does Bhagavan say that the pure awareness is not only aware of knowledge of other things, it's also devoid of, why does he say that the pure awareness is not only devoid of knowledge of other things, it's also devoid of ignorance of other things? The reason being, we can be said to be ignorant of something only if it exists. If someone invents some piece of history and said there was a major war in 1990, there was a major war. Do you know about it? We will say, no, I know there was no such war. We cannot be said to be ignorant of that war because there was no such war actually took place. So you can only be said to be ignorant of something if something actually exists. If something doesn't exist, if something that has no existence, we can't be said to be ignorant of it. So, but in the view of pure awareness, there is nothing other than itself for it to know. Since there's nothing for it to know, there's nothing that it doesn't know. It's true, it doesn't know anything other than itself, but it can't be said to be ignorant of anything other than itself because there's nothing other than itself for it to know. It alone is what actually exists. That's why the knowledge and ignorance of other things, they're a pair of opposites, they're a dvandva, a dyad. So all pairs of opposites seem to exist only in the view of ego. our real nature, the pure awareness that we actually are, is beyond all is beyond all pairs of opposites, all pairs of opposites like existence, non-existence, knowledge, ignorance, awareness, non-awareness, happiness, unhappiness. It's beyond all life, death. It's beyond all such pairs of opposites. Because in its view, there's only one thing that exists, namely itself, and there's nothing else exists at all. As Bhagavan said in verse, in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nana, Yatatamai ulladu atmasarupamandre. That means what actually exists is only atmasarupa. Atmasarupa means the real nature of ourself. So what we actually are, which is Satchit, the pure being, the pure awareness, that alone is what actually exists. Everything else is just an appearance. And to whom does it appear? It appears only to ego. And ego itself is a false appearance. If ego turns its attention back towards itself to see who am I, it will subside and dissolve back into its source, and it will recognize itself to be pure awareness. But when it recognizes itself to be pure awareness, it ceases to be ego and remains as pure awareness. Just like if we look at what seems to be a snake, if we look at it carefully enough, we'll say, oh, it's just a rope. When we see that it's a rope, we'll see that there never was a snake there at all. Likewise, when we see ourselves as pure awareness, we will know that we were never ego. So we seem to be ego only so long as we're attending to other things. If we turn our attention back towards ourselves to see who am I, we will see that what we actually are is pure awareness, and therefore there was never any ego. And since everything else appeared only in the view of ego, when we know there's never was any ego, there never was anything else. So the ultimate state, as Bhagavan often pointed out, the ultimate truth, the Paramatika Satya, is only ajata. Nothing has ever ceased to exist. Na nirodo. Nothing has ceased. Why? Na cha upatti. But nothing has ever come into existence. This is a verse in Gaudapada's Mandukya Karika, and also occurs in a couple of minor Upanishads. Nothing has ever ceased to exist. There's no nirodha, no cessation, and there's no upatti. There's no coming into existence. There's no one bound and no one seeking liberation, and there's also no one who's attained liberation. Because what actually exists alone is what is. This is Paramatika Satya. So that is why what Bhagavan means here. Before I go on to the next verse, does anyone have any questions about anything I've been saying? Are there any questions online or?
There are no questions on YouTube, and I do not see any questions coming up here, sir. In case any questions come up on YouTube, I shall relay them to you.
Okay, so I'll go on to verse 28 now. First, I'll read the Tamil version and then the Sanskrit version. What Bhagavan says is in verse 28 is Tanadu il Yadu ena terihil. If one knows what the nature of oneself is, there in Tamil, Tanadu, that is a poetic elongation of Tanadu. It means one's own. Il means nature. Yadu, what is one's real nature? If one knows what is one's real nature, Pin, Anadi Ananta Sat Undi Para, Akanda, Chidananda, Undipara. He splits up the Sat and the Chitananda simply for poetic reasons. So if we arrange it in Anvayam, in the natural prose order, what Bhagavan is saying here is Tanadu il yadu ena terihel. If one knows what the real nature of oneself is, pin anadi, ananta, akanda, satchidananda. Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless or limitless. In other words, infinite. And akanda means akanda is unbroken, undivided. Sat, Chit, Ananda. That is what we actually are. So what Bhagavan is saying here, when we know what we actually, well, we can take this actually in we can interpret it in two ways. Because what he says is, if one knows what the real nature of oneself is, then Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda, we can interpret that in two ways. We can either take it to mean, then what will remain is only Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda, or then what we will know ourselves to be is Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. Both meanings are appropriate and both amount to the same thing. That is, when we know ourselves as we actually are, we alone will remain, and what we actually are is only Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. Anadi, because we have no beginning and also no end. So it's Anadi and Ananta. Ananta also means no limit. So it means infinite. So we are infinite. That is Satchidananda is, in a certain sense, we can say it pervades all of time and space, but actually it is beyond time and space, because time and space are limitations. Time and space appear only in the view of ego, which is a false awareness of ourselves. What we actually are is only that Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. So that is the Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. That is the Adhara, the Adhisthana, the base on which everything else appears. And it is Akanda. Akanda means it cannot be divided. It cannot be broken. So we cannot divide ourselves. So that also implies it's immutable. We can Satchidananda can never become anything else. There are certain interpretations of Vedanta, but what are called Parinamavada. They think that Brahman has become all of this. But according to Advaita, the truth is Vivartavada. That is, all this multiplicity is just an appearance. And in whose view does it appear? Only in the view of ego. Without ego, there would be no appearance of multiplicity. So when we know ourselves, ego will be removed, everything else will be removed along with it, and then what will remain is what we actually are. And what we actually are, our real nature, is Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. Sat means being or existence. In other words, what actually exists. Chit means or we can also say for Sat, it's pure being or pure existence. Chit is the pure awareness. That is the awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. So Sat Chit is aware of nothing other than Sat Chit. And being aware of ourselves as we actually are, that is Ananda. So Sat is Chit, and Chit is Sat. Sat is Ananda, and Ananda is Sat. Chit is Ananda, and Ananda is Chit. So though we use three words, these are three descriptions of one and the same thing, namely our own real nature. Because our real nature is indivisible. So our existence and our awareness cannot be two different things, because awareness is the very nature of our existence. Awareness is what we actually are. And likewise with happiness. Happiness is our very nature. Happiness is not something other than ourselves. We ourselves are the infinite happiness, but we are all seeking. The problem is we're seeking it in the wrong places. So in the Sanskrit version of this verse, what Bhagavan says is, Kim Sarupam iti. What is the Swarupa? What is one's real nature? Atmadarshane. On seeing oneself, what is one's real nature? It's a particle which can't really be translated. In some contexts, we can translate it as inverted commas, but here it's not even. It's on seeing oneself thus, we can take it as thus. On seeing oneself thus, what is one's real nature? That implies if we investigate what our real nature is and thereby see ourselves, Abhaya Abhava Apurna Chitsukam. Abhaya is imperishable. Abhava unborn. Apurna is full, whole. Chitsukam, awareness, happiness. Hearing, because of the brevity of the Sanskrit meter, Bhagavan didn't mention Sat here, but it's implied, obviously, because that is, Chit is Sat and Sat is Chit. So when he talks about Chitsukam, the happiness of that is awareness, that awareness is Sat. So though Sat isn't mentioned explicitly in the Sanskrit, it's implied here. So the words he uses, the Abhya means immutable or imperishable. That is, it cannot change in any way. It cannot perish. It cannot decay in any way. Abhava is means unborn. It has never taken birth. It has no origin because it's ever existing, and it's apurna. It's the whole. It's the infinite whole. Apurna means what is full, whole, or complete, but it implies what is infinite, because only the infinite is the whole. Anything less than the infinite is a part. So, does anyone have any questions about this verse?
Sir, I believe a question has come up from Pradeep Kumarji.
Oh, right, I see.
Should I read it out for the benefit of the devotees?
Yes, please do.
Sure. Pradeep Kumarji is asking, quote, can we say Vidya, knowledge, and Avidya, nescience, are Maya? Also, can you elaborate on Sat and how is it different from Chit? Is it related to Jada? Unquote.
Right. Avidya and Maya are one and the same thing. Avidya means ignorance. But what is it that is ignorant? What is ignorant is only ego. Why is ego ignorant? That is, it's avidya, it's a very special type of ignorance, because as ego, that is, vidya is the real awareness. So that has nothing to do with Maya. Vidya is our real nature. That what is called vidya is nothing but the pure awareness I am. Even when we rise as ego, we don't cease to be aware I am. But instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am this person. So that this person or this body that we take ourselves to be, this is not what we actually are. So being aware of ourselves as I am this body is a false awareness. So what is called avidya is nothing but the false awareness I am this body. what we actually are is nothing other than I am. But so long as we take ourselves to be I am this body, we are not experiencing ourselves as we actually are. That is, we never cease to be aware of I am. We never cease to be aware that I am. That is, we never cease to be aware of our existence. What we are ignorant of is our identity. We fail to be aware of what I am, because we're aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So that is what is meant by avidya. So avidya, Bhagavan often said, avidya is nothing but ego itself. That is, ego is that false awareness, or that which is always aware of itself as, I am this body. That is the false awareness. That is what is meant by avidya. And that is Maya. There's no Maya other than ego. That is, Maya is said to have two powers, avarana and vikshepa. Avarana means veiling. What is the veiling? The veiling is nothing but ego itself, because ego is the false awareness, I am this body. That is the adjunct mixed awareness. That is what veils our real nature as the pure I am. Though we're always aware I am, we're not aware of our I am is our own existence, our own being. We're always aware of our own existence, but we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are, because we are aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, namely a body. So that is the avarana. And as soon as we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, we are consequently aware of so many other things. That awareness of other things is vikshepa. Vikshepa means what? Scattering scattering or dispersing. So our awareness becomes scattered as so many objects. We see ourselves as the multiple phenomena that constitute this world. That is vikshepa. So these are the two defining characteristics of ego. As ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, and we are consequently aware of the semi-existence of other things. So all other things seem to exist only in the view of ego, which is itself a false awareness. So how to get rid of ego? Since ego is a false awareness, if it's an awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, we can get rid of this false awareness only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. As soon as we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, we'll cease to be aware of ourselves as anything else. That is, so long as we don't recognize that it's a rope, the snake seems to be a snake. But as soon as we recognize, oh, it's just a rope, then the snake ceases to be a snake. So it seems to be a snake only so long as we don't recognize what it actually is. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, ego will be destroyed. Having known ourselves as the pure I am, we can never know ourselves as anything other than that. So avidya and Maya are nothing but ego. And ego is a false awareness of ourselves. When we know ourselves as we actually are, ego will be destroyed. Therefore, avidya and Maya will be destroyed. This is one of the ways in which Bhagavan has simplified and clarified the ancient teachings of Advaita, because there's a lot of talk in the ancient texts about avidya and Maya. And even among the followers of Shankara, there was a dispute arose about where is the location, where is the ashraya of avidya, of ignorance? Is it in jiva or is it in Brahman? And one school said it must be in, it cannot be in Brahman, because Brahman cannot be ignorant, so it must be in jiva. And the other school said no, but the jiva arises out of ignorance, so it cannot be in jiva, so it must be in Brahman. So these are the two major schools among the post-Shankara Advaitins. I think they were called, I've forgotten which was which, the Bhamati school and the Vivarana school. But Bhagavan resolved this dispute very simply. He said, jiva is ego. Jiva is itself avidya. There's no avidya other than jiva. Jiva and avidya are one and the same thing, because jiva is the false awareness, I am this body. So avidya and Maya are both nothing but ego. If we remove ego, all problems are solved. So that's the first question. The second question is, can you elaborate on Sat and how it is different from Chit? I cannot elaborate on that because it is not different from Chit. That is, as I mentioned earlier, in verse 23, what Bhagavan said is, Sat means what exists. Chit means what is aware. So Bhagavan said, because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists is itself awareness. In other words, if Chit was something other than Sat, it would be asat, it would be non-existent. Then it couldn't know anything. A non-existent awareness cannot know anything. So Chit cannot be other than Sat. And if Sat was something other than Chit, it wouldn't know itself. So it would seem to exist only in the view of Chit. So Sat and Chit cannot be different. They are one and the same thing. And what is Sat Chit? You are that, Tattvamasi. That is, we ourselves are what actually exists and what is aware of what actually exists. Because what actually exists and the awareness of what actually exists are one and the same thing. That is, our existence and our awareness of our existence are not two different things. So Sat Chit is what is always shining in us as the pure awareness I am. That is our pure awareness. That is our pure being. In other words, that is what we actually are. So Sat and Chit are one and the same thing. Sat means what actually exists. What actually exists? Only the pure awareness I am, which is our own real nature. When Bhagavan says in Nana, in the 7th paragraph, what I referred to earlier, Yathatamai Uladu, what actually exists, Atma-sarupam, Andre, is only Atma-sarupa. Atma-sarupa is the real nature of ourself. The real nature of ourself is Chit, which is Sat, and Sat, which is Chit. So Sat and Chit are inseparable. They're two ways of describing the same thing. That is, what actually exists is only awareness. So what actually exists, that means Sat, awareness means Chit. So what actually exists is awareness. But the awareness is not the awareness that we call mind. That is the awareness that knows other things. It is the pure awareness, the awareness that is aware of nothing other than itself. That is the awareness that Bhagavan describes in verse 27, when he says, the awareness that is devoid of awareness and ignorance of other things is the real awareness. So the real awareness is the pure awareness. That itself is Sat. Uladu unavahum, as Bhagavan says in verse 23, or in the Sanskrit version, how did he say it? Satya hi chit, I think. Yes, Satya hi chit. Satya literally means as awareness. He means certainly, chit is awareness. So that implies what shines as Sat is certainly awareness. In other words, what actually exists is only awareness. And then is it related to Jada is the fine thing. Jada is the opposite of Chit. That is, Chit means what is aware, Jada means what is not aware. So all the reality, what actually exists is Chit. When we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently we're aware of other things. The body and all other things, all objects, all phenomena are Jada. They're not aware of anything. So is ego Chit or is it Jada? It is neither one nor the other. It is a confused mixture of the two. That is why ego is called Chit Jada Granti. That is, ego is the false awareness, I am this body. In other words, it's that which is aware of itself as I am this body. In that adjunct mixed awareness, I am this body, the I am portion, that is the Chit, that is the pure awareness, the awareness that is the Sat Chit, that is I am. The body is an adjunct, the body is Jada, I am is Chit. When these two are mixed and conflated together, when they're taken to be one, that is what is called Chit Jada Granti. That is the knot formed by the entanglement of Chit and Jada. Of course, Chit is never actually entangled, but in the view of ego, our awareness seems to be now entangled with this body. We seem to be aware of ourselves as I am this body. I is the name of awareness. That is, awareness is always aware of itself as I. The body doesn't, as Bhagavan says in verse 24 of Uludunapdu, Jada Udul Na Nenadu. The insentient body does not say I. What he means by it does not say I, that's a metaphorical way of saying it is not aware of itself as I. And then in the next sentence, he says, Satchit Udiyadu. Satchit does not rise. And then in the third sentence, in between, one thing rises as the extent of a body. Or one thing I rises as the extent of a body. Nan ondru udikum, udalalava, nan ondru udikum, ideal, in between. So when he says in between, he means it's neither the body, which is Jada, nor is it Satchit, which doesn't rise. Why? It's not Satchit because it rises. It's not the body because it's aware of itself as I. So it's neither the body nor Satchit, but it takes itself to be both. So it is called Chit Jada Granti, he says. And that Chit Jada Granti, he says, Idu Chit Jada Granti bandam. This is bondage. That taking ourselves to be this body is bondage. We are binding ourselves. This knot is binding ourselves, us to the body. Bandam, jivan. It is jiva. It is the individual soul. Nupame. It is the subtle body. Ahande, ego. Ichamsaram. This samsara. That is, samsara is nothing but ego, and manam, mind. So there is actually no relation between Chit and Jada at all. Why they seem to be related is because of the spurious entity called ego that rises between the two and mixes them together. And ego is neither the pure Sat-Chit, nor is it the body which is Jada, but it borrows the properties of both. So when Bhagavan says in between, it's like, supposing you read a story in the newspaper and you're doubtful whether that story is true or not. So you ask your friend, is this story true or is it false? And your friend may say to you, it's neither true nor false. It's somewhere in between. What does that mean? It means it's got elements of truth in it. It's got elements of fiction in it. It's neither entirely true nor is it entirely false. It's a mixture of the two. Likewise with ego. Ego is not entirely false because it's got the real element I am. But it's not entirely true either because it's got the false element ego. I mean, this body, the Jada portion. So when we investigate ourselves, what we are investigating is as Bhagavan said, it's the Chit portion of ego that we're investigating. In other words, it's that fundamental awareness I am. By holding on to I am, that is, when we hold on to I am, everything else will drop off because this body is not attached. It hasn't attached itself to us. It's we who have attached ourselves to this body. The body isn't holding us. We are holding the body. So if instead of holding the body, we hold on to our being, the body and all adjuncts will drop off. And that is the state Bhagavan referred to in verse 25, in which he said, seeing oneself without adjuncts is seeing God, because God shines as oneself. So how to see God? Only by clinging to our own being. When we cling to our being, the adjuncts which we were previously clinging to will drop off because we're no longer holding them. And what remains is our pure being, and that is God. So the seeing ourselves without adjuncts is seeing God. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
James, thank you once again, as always, on behalf of the devotees at Raman Kendra Delhi. A heartfelt gratitude and thanks for this wonderful session, sir.
All thanks to Bhagavan.
Absolutely
This is
true.
all that comes only from him.
Absolutely, very true, very true. It is Bhagwan's grace which is keeping all of us together, and
Yes.
he guides us on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
Thank you once again, sir, and we shall meet you again next month, second Sunday.
Yes.
I shall now request Narayananji at the Kendra to initiate Akshat Manamalai and Arati. Thank you, sir.
And can I say
Yes, sir.
say one thing? That
Yes,
is
sir. Yes, sir. Please.
No, I
please
was just going to say, next time I'll be dealing with the last two verses, 29 and 30.
Very
So
well.
if anyone has any questions, either about Upadesa Sara or any aspect of Bhagavan teachings, if anyone has questions, we should have plenty of time for questions next time.
Very well, sir. Very well.
Right.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right.
Narayananji, over to you.
அருணாச்சல் வளர்க்கேற்ற அக்ஷர மணமாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் அருளி காப்பாயே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறழுப்பார் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் தினமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகமுகுந்தீர்த்துன் அககுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆருக்காயனை ஆண்டன் அகற்றில் தினம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்த உனையே நினைப்பித்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னை பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று புலம்பிடா உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கி உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திப்போல் என்னை கலவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போல் அகத்தில் நீலையோ அருணாச்சலா. ஒருவன் நாம் உன்னை ஒளி தேவர் வருவா உன் சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. ஓங்கார பொருள் உயர்வில்லை உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா. அவ்வை போலெனக்குன் அருளை தந்து என்னை ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி. ஓம் பூர்புவஸ்வ தஸ்ஸோதர்வவேணியம் भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्. देवसवितपृष्ठसत्यं दर्शेन प्रसन्नामि अमृतत्वमृता. ओम प्राणय स्वाहा ओम अपारे स्वाहा ओम ज्ञाने उदाने स्वाहा ओम समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा. अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः. अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः. अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः. कात्याय मुरुगा वल्ली दैवालय नमः. सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः. स्वामीनाथाय नमः. दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः. नटराजरे नमः. भैरवरे नमः. नंदी महेश्वराय नमः. शिव पार्वतीये नमः. ओम नमः शिवाय नमः. ओम नमः शिवाय नमः. ओम नमः शिवाय नमः. पुरगंड गोसीरं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि. मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि. अमृतपुसं उत्तरावसं समर्पयामि. नीराजनं समर्पयामि. नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि. वीरवर समायिकं नागवल्ली तलयोर्धं कर्पूर्ण सूर्ण सप्तं प्रदुग्धां कर्पूर्ण नीराजनं श्री रमण महर्षिकी समर्पयामि. पुष्पं वेद पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति चन्द्रमा पुष्पं पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति ॐ तद्ब्रह्मा ॐ तद्वायु ॐ तदात्मा ॐ तत्सत्यं ॐ तत्सर्वं ॐ तत्पुरो नमः अन्तर्जगद्भूतेश गुहायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वं यज्ञस् तं वसत्कारस् तं इन्द्रस् तं रुद्रस् तं विष्णुः तं ब्रह्म त्वं प्रजापति ॐ त्वा तदा आबो ज्योतिषो अमृतं ब्रह्मोत्सरो न कर्मणा न प्रजया धने नित्यानैके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नीतं गुहायं विप्राजते दत्तदयो विसन्ति वेदान्तविज्ञानसे नित्यदार्थ संन्यासयोगातदे शुद्धसत्त्वा ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्धकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे तारं विभावं परमेश्वरभूतं यत्पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्य सगुंसदं तत्रावित्तक्रमकगनं विशोकस् तस्मिन् यदसुभासिद्ध्यं यो वेदान्तौ स्वरूपलोकुतो वेदान्तस्य प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमयेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं श्रीरमणमहर्षिं मन्त्रपुष्पं कात्यायन मुरुगावल्लीदेवानिक्यं मन्त्रपुष्पं नटराजर्कं मन्त्रपुष्पं शिवपार्वतीक्यं समर्पयामि ॐ तत्सद्ब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम
गणेशाय गोविंद ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the conclusion of today's satsang with Mr. Michael James for Upadesa Saram. We shall reconvene on second Sunday of next week. Namo Ramana.